I never imagined that the happiest day of my life would begin with a coffin disguised as a gift. The box was long, wrapped in silver paper, placed neatly among the mountain of congratulatory packages at the reception hall. People assumed it was some expensive crystal set, or maybe a family heirloom. But when I opened it, instead of champagne flutes, I found a plain brown envelope stamped with the seal of the Metropolitan Prosecutor's Office. Inside, in cold black ink, was a single sheet: termination of service. Effective immediately. And the signature at the bottom? Marcus Valand, the deputy prosecutor's son, the man who had spent months circling me like a vulture in the courthouse corridors. My name is Nicholas Gray, forensic analyst. For the last 6 years, I had built and perfected a proprietary system for cross-referencing digital evidence. Timestamps, location metadata, encrypted communications. Judges called it revolutionary. Detectives swore it saved them weeks of work. I called it my life's obsession. Now, standing in my wedding tuxedo, my wife Lila clutching my arm with trembling fingers, I stared at the termination notice. Guests laughed and clinked glasses in the background, unaware that in a single moment, my entire career had been executed in the shadows. "Nick," Lila whispered, her dark eyes scanning the page. "They can't do this. Not today." But they had. And the cruel poetry of the timing made one thing crystal clear. This was never about protocol. This was punishment. The months leading up to the wedding had been tense. Marcus, entitled heir to his father's office, had pushed for shortcuts in high-profile cases. Evidence that disappeared. Testimonies that suddenly contradicted themselves. He had the arrogance of someone untouchable, and the recklessness of a child with a box of matches. When I flagged irregularities in the Hale construction investigation, Marcus smiled too wide and said, "Don't overcomplicate things, Gray. Let's just call it a clerical error." But my system didn't make clerical errors. It made maps of truth, and the truth pointed straight to him. I reported quietly to my supervisor. 2 weeks later, my car brakes mysteriously failed. Another week, a file was deleted from the central archive, the only copy of evidence against a major developer. And now the ultimate silencer, a pink slip hand-delivered in front of the people I loved. The cruelty wasn't just in the dismissal. It was in the timing, the setting, the symbolism. My wedding day was supposed to be my shield. Instead, it was the execution ground Marcus had chosen for me. Lila reacted faster than I did. While I stood frozen with rage, she slipped the envelope into her clutch, hiding it from the curious eyes of guests. Her smile stayed fixed, brittle but convincing as she pulled me back onto the dance floor. "They think they've ended you," she whispered as we swayed to the music. "But they've underestimated us." That single word reignited something in me. 4 years I had fought my battles alone. Late nights in the lab decoding corrupted drives, piecing together fragments of erased text messages. But Lila was different. She wasn't just my bride. She was a journalist with a hunger for truth as sharp as mine. Hours later, when the last guest drifted home, she placed the envelope back in my hands. "Nick," she said, "do you want to know why Marcus risked doing this today? Look inside the lining." I frowned, tugging at the corner of the envelope. Beneath the glued seam, there was a thin slip of microfilm. Black and white images flickered under the lamplight. Building contracts, bribes disguised as safety inspections, signatures forged with uncanny precision. And then his name. Marcus Valand. My blood went cold. This wasn't just arrogance. This was conspiracy. That night, I understood the depth of the trap. My termination wasn't a bureaucratic accident. It was a preemptive strike. If I went public, Marcus would claim I was a bitter ex-employee inventing stories to save face. The system I had built was locked behind department firewalls, and without access I had no proof. Except for the microfilm. Lila leaned against me, her voice low but steady. "We can't fight this inside the office. They control everything there. We fight from the outside. You have the knowledge. I have the press connections. Together we're dead." I cut in harsher than I intended. "They won't let this reach daylight. Marcus isn't just covering his tracks. He's burying anyone who steps near them." She touched my hand, forcing me to look at her. "Nick, when have you ever walked away from the truth?" Her question echoed into the silence of our hotel suite, louder than the traffic outside. She was right. I had built my reputation on one unshakable principle. Evidence doesn't lie. People do. And Marcus had just handed me enough rope to hang himself, if I had the courage to pull. The next morning my phone rang nonstop. Unknown numbers. Blocked IDs. A single voicemail from my old supervisor. "Nicholas, for your own safety, leave this alone." take the settlement and disappear. This goes higher than you think. I deleted it. Because I wasn't going to disappear. I was going to resurrect myself from the ashes of their betrayal. And when I rose, I wouldn't come alone. Lila and I had already drafted the plan by sunrise. She would leak selective fragments to investigative journalists, while I reconstructed my system from scratch in a hidden lab. For the first time in my life, being fired felt less like an ending and more like an opportunity. They thought they had buried me on my wedding day. But what they really did was give me permission to become unstoppable. I always thought the city courthouse was the most secure place I'd ever set foot in. Vault doors, biometric scanners, cameras in every hallway. But the safest place I ever built wasn't behind government locks. It was in a windowless basement beneath a pawn shop on the east side, where the smell of motor oil and cigarette smoke masked the hum of servers. The owner, an old man named Raoul, never asked questions. He rented me the space in cash, no contract, no paper trail. People come here when they want to disappear, he said, handing me the keys. Just don't bring cops or corpses. I brought neither, at least not yet. The first weeks after my firing were a blur. Lila and I moved like ghosts, keeping our phones off, paying in cash, meeting only in crowded places where surveillance would be difficult. Every night, I worked in the basement, piecing together the skeleton of my evidence system. I had no access to the department servers anymore, but memory is a stubborn thing. Line by line, I rewrote the algorithms from scratch, fueled by cheap coffee and rage. Lila handled the outside world. She met with contacts in the press under false names, passing fragments of the microfilm as anonymous leaks. She was careful, strategic, enough to stir suspicion but not enough to expose our source. The stories that appeared in the paper were small at first. Inconsistencies in building safety reports, developers linked to suspicious permit approvals. No mention of Marcus. Not yet. But he noticed. 2 weeks in, Lila found a note taped to our apartment door. No envelope, no handwriting. Just 5 typed words, stop or she disappears next. We didn't sleep that night. She wanted to go to the police. I stopped her. The same department that just buried me? They'll file it as a prank and use it to discredit you. Her jaw clenched. So what do? Pretend we're not being hunted? No, I said. We flipped the hunt. The next morning, I called in a favor from an old detective I trusted, someone Marcus hadn't gotten his hooks into yet. His name was Alvarez, a grizzled veteran with a smoker's cough and eyes that had seen too many crime scenes. When he showed up at the pawnshop basement, he looked around at the humming servers and piles of hard drives. Jesus Gray. You planning to solve crimes or start Skynet? Both, if necessary, I muttered. I slid him a flash drive, a cleaned-up portion of the microfilm data. Contracts. Bribes. Altered inspections. He scrolled through in silence, then whistled low. This is dynamite. But if I bring this upstairs, it gets buried before lunch. You know that, right? I did. That's why I needed him off the record. I don't want you to bring it upstairs, I said. I want you to confirm it. Quietly. Independently. If Marcus tries to bury you, I'll still have my own chain of proof. Alvarez studied me for a long moment. Then he pocketed the drive. Careful, Gray. You're not just poking the bear. You're gutting it alive. That night, as I typed lines of code until my vision blurred, Lila appeared at the door of the basement, her hair damp from the rain. She carried a manila envelope and a look that scared me more than any threat. They came to the newsroom, she whispered. 2 men in suits. Said they were from compliance. They asked my editor about me. He told them I was on leave. Nick, they know. My stomach turned to ice. I pulled her into the room, locking the door behind us. Then we accelerate. We don't wait for them to crush us piece by piece. We drop everything at once. She shook her head fiercely. No. If we go too early, they'll spin it. You know how the headlines work. Disgraced analyst, bitter wife, fabricated evidence. We'll be the story, not the corruption. She was right. Timing mattered more than truth. The wrong truth at the wrong time dies before it breathes. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling pipes, listening to the servers hum like restless beasts. Then what do? She placed the manila envelope on my desk. Inside were photographs, grainy night vision shots of Marcus entering a luxury high-rise at 2 a.m., briefcase in hand. Another man met him there. Not a developer. Not a lawyer. A judge. It was worse than I thought. Marcus wasn't just altering cases to protect businessmen. He was building an entire circuit of corrupted officials, one briefcase at a time. The evidence on the microfilm was only the surface. This was systemic. I looked at Lila, who watched me with steady eyes. If this is real, we can't stop at journalism. We'll need a public reckoning, something undeniable. Her lips curled in a grim smile. Then let's give them a reckoning. The next few days blurred into a manic rhythm. I coded, cross-referencing Lila's photos with leaked city records, reconstructing timelines of meetings, payments, altered case outcomes. Alvarez sent word that at least 3 of the clerical errors I'd flagged months ago matched cases Marcus had handled personally. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed, and the picture was uglier than either of us had imagined. Then came the breaking point. At 3 a.m., as rain lashed against the basement's steel grate, one of my servers pinged an alert. Someone was probing the system remotely. Not random hacking. Targeted. Sophisticated. They found us, I muttered. Lila sat up on the cot in the corner, rubbing sleep from her eyes. What do we do? I typed furiously, deploying countermeasures. Whoever was on the other end knew their craft, but they weren't expecting my code. After 10 minutes of digital sparring, the intrusion cut off. But not before leaving a message burned into the logs. We see you, Gray. I stared at the screen, adrenaline flooding my veins. For the first time, fear wasn't just in the shadows. It was staring directly back at me. And for the first time, I realized Marcus wasn't fighting alone. This went higher. Much higher. What lay on that hidden drive wasn't just evidence of corruption. It was proof of who Marcus really worked for. And when I opened it, I realized he wasn't the top of the chain at all. He was just the leash dog of someone far more dangerous. The attack didn't come with bullets. It came with headlines. 3 weeks after my firing, as I pored over lines of code in the basement, Lila burst in holding the morning paper. Her hands trembled, not from the chill of the rain outside, but from fury. Nick, she said, throwing it onto my desk. They've turned you into a criminal. The front page was a full-color smear. Former analyst suspected in evidence tampering scandal. Beneath my face, a photo pulled from a courthouse ID, stared back at me. The article claimed I had altered forensic results in multiple high-profile cases. That I'd been terminated for misconduct. That my disappearance was an admission of guilt. They're poisoning the well, Lila whispered. By the time we release the truth, no one will believe us. I gripped the paper so hard it tore. Marcus's fingerprints were all over this. He hadn't just silenced me. He was rewriting my entire story brick by brick. That afternoon, Alvarez came by with grim news. The higher-ups are buying the narrative, he said, lighting a cigarette despite the no-smoking sign Raul had taped to the wall. Internal memos already say you corrupted your own system to favor certain prosecutions. They're setting you up as the fall guy for everything. My chest burned. Then we dropped the proof now. All of it. No, Alvarez said firmly. If you dump it raw, it looks like desperation. And once they discredit the source, it dies in a day. You need something undeniable, something the public sees with their own eyes. Lila leaned forward. Like a broadcast. Alvarez frowned. Hey, what? A live reveal, she said. We gather enough evidence into one narrative and release it not as a leak, not as a file drop, but as a story told directly to the people. Nick's system can map every payment, every meeting, every forged signature. If we stream it live, Marcus can't bury it. I hesitated. It was risky. Dangerous. But she was right. If I wanted my truth to breathe, I had to drag it into the daylight, where even Marcus's shadows couldn't smother it. For the next week, the basement became a war room. Lila scripted, rehearsed, cut video segments of the corruption chain. Alvarez secured anonymous sources willing to back us. I worked until my eyes burned, feeding data into my rebuilt system, generating interactive graphs that connected Marcus to judges, developers, inspectors, a constellation of rot. Every click, every line of code felt like loading a bullet into the chamber. But they weren't blind. On the eve of the broadcast, as I carried a server back up to the pawnshop basement, a black SUV screeched around the corner. The passenger window rolled down. I barely heard the crack before the brick wall behind me exploded in dust. Gunfire. I dove behind a dumpster, clutching the hard drive to my chest. 2 men stepped out of the SUV, both masked. They moved fast, professional. Not Marcus's usual swaggering thugs. These were hired hands. Killers. One aimed his weapon at the dumpster. I heard the metallic click of the safety. And then a roar. Raul, the old pawnshop owner, appeared from the alley with a shotgun. He didn't hesitate. One blast shattered the night, forcing the gunman back. Another round peppered the SUV's windshield. Cursing, they scrambled inside and peeled away, tires screaming. When silence returned, Raoul spat onto the pavement. "Told you not to bring corpses," he muttered. Inside, my hands still shook as I set the hard drive onto the table. The bullet holes in the alley had nearly erased months of work. Lila pressed her forehead to mine. "Nick, they're not bluffing anymore. They'll kill you." I stared at the glowing monitors, the web of corruption spreading across the screen. "Then they're scared. And if they're scared, it means we're close." The next night we went live. Lila's journalist contacts set up a secure feed routed through multiple servers, impossible to cut midstream without collapsing half the city's network. Alvarez sat off camera ready to verify. Me? I faced the camera, my own face plastered across the same city that now called me a fraud. "My name is Nicholas Gray," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline tearing through me. "They said I corrupted the system. They said I disappeared out of guilt. Tonight I'll show you the truth." I clicked the first graph. Payments lit the screen like veins of fire. Developers to Marcus. Marcus to judges. Judges to construction permits. Every connection was time-stamped, cross-verified, unassailable. Viewers flooded in, tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. The chat box filled with disbelief, then anger, then demands for accountability. For one brief, burning hour, the truth lived free. But victory is never clean. As I wrapped the presentation, the screen flickered. Lines of static cut through the graphs. My system sputtered. Then, in bold red letters across the feed, "Evidence fabricated. Gray is a fraud." Someone was inside, sabotaging the broadcast live. Lila gasped. Alvarez cursed. I hammered the keyboard, fighting the intrusion. For every command I typed, the hacker countered. Graphs distorted, dates altered, signatures erased. My masterpiece was being gutted before the world's eyes. And then the feed cut to black. Silence. The truth we had fought to build was gone in an instant. Or so they thought. Because while the hacker shredded the live data, he never touched the offline backups. The hard drive I had nearly died protecting. And on that drive was something I hadn't shown anyone. Something even Marcus didn't know existed. The hard drive sat on the desk like a silent judge, humming faintly as if it knew what it contained. Lila leaned over my shoulder while Alvarez paced the room, his cigarette burning dangerously close to the filter. "Play it," he said. I clicked the first folder. Inside wasn't just data. It was surveillance, videos, transcripts, phone recordings, all meticulously cataloged. Someone had been documenting Marcus, not helping him. Every payment he'd taken, every bribe he'd delivered, every falsified permit was already archived. Lila frowned. "Wait, this isn't your work. Who the hell is spying on Marcus?" The answer appeared in the metadata: Dominic Rourke. My blood ran cold. Rourke wasn't just anyone. He was a name whispered in half-truths across the city, a billionaire developer whose empire of glass towers rose over downtown like monuments to greed. He never lost a contract, never faced a conviction, and never, ever appeared in a courtroom. He didn't need to. His money spoke louder than laws. Marcus wasn't the architect of corruption. He was just the errand boy, the leash dog, the chaos maker who kept eyes off the true master. And Rourke? He had been keeping his pet on a very short leash. The videos were damning. Marcus delivering envelopes to judges. Marcus shredding evidence in late-night office runs. Marcus meeting Rourke in an underground garage, bowing his head like a servant. But what froze me was the final file, a live feed timestamp just 3 days earlier. Rourke's voice, smooth as polished marble, speaking into the camera. "Gray is a problem. If Marcus cannot bury him, we'll burn him. Make sure the narrative sticks. He cannot be allowed to crawl back into the light." The feed ended with Marcus nodding silently, fear written across his face. I sat back, bow rising in my throat. This wasn't a personal vendetta anymore. This was a machine, and I was the wrench caught in its gears. Alvarez slammed his fist on the table. "Christ, Nick, do you realize what this means? You're not up against one spoiled prosecutor's kid. You're up against Rourke. The man owns half the city council." Lila's jaw tightened. "Then that's who we go after. Marcus is small potatoes. Rourke is the disease." But Alvarez shook his head. "You don't just go after Dominic Rourke. He buries senators for sport. If you're going to take a shot at that man, you'd better not miss." I closed the laptop, heart pounding. Then we don't miss. The following days were a blur of paranoia. The smear campaign against me grew louder. My broadcast was mocked as a hoax. Anonymous commentators tore apart my credibility. Meanwhile, strange cars idled near the pawn shop at night. Raoul swore he'd seen drones buzzing over the alley. And then the ultimatum arrived. Lila found it tucked under our apartment door, folded neatly like an invitation. 1 week. Surrender the drive. Or watch her disappear. No signature. No logo. Just the weight of inevitability. Her hands trembled as she handed it to me. Nick, they know we have it. I pulled her close, my mind racing. They weren't bluffing. The only question was, how far would they go to protect Rourke? We couldn't sit still. I reached out to one of Lila's journalist allies, a war correspondent named Jonah Pike, who had once smuggled footage out of cartel territory. If anyone could handle exposing a titan like Rourke, it was him. Jonah met us in an abandoned subway station, his scarred face half hidden beneath a hood. "You're either the bravest fools I've ever met," he said, "or the deadest." I handed him a copy of the drive. "We need this out there. All of it. Unfiltered." Jonah weighed it in his hand, then slipped it into his pack. "If I release this, they'll come for me too. You ready to burn the whole city with you?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. But Lila's voice was softer. "We're ready to rebuild it after." Jonah gave a low whistle. Dangerous couple. 3 nights later, everything ignited. Jonah's exposé dropped like a bomb across international news networks. Not just Marcus, not just judges, but Rourke himself, filmed and recorded, orchestrating an empire of corruption. The city gasped. Protesters filled the courthouse steps. Senators demanded inquiries. Developers panicked as contracts froze. But Rourke didn't panic. He retaliated. The morning after the exposé, as Lila and I sipped stale coffee in the basement, every screen lit up with the same breaking headline. Journalist Jonah Pike found dead in car explosion. The words slammed into me like a physical blow. Lila dropped her cup, ceramic shattering across the floor. "Oh my God." Alvarez cursed, throwing his cigarette at the wall. "That's your warning shot. They're done playing. Next will be you." My chest tightened, grief and fury colliding. Jonah had risked everything to release the truth, and Rourke had erased him like an inconvenience. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt real fear, not for myself but for Lila. We couldn't hide anymore. We couldn't wait. If Rourke thought he'd silenced me, he was wrong. Because buried in the files was one secret Jonah hadn't released. A name. A foreign account. And proof that Dominic Rourke's empire didn't stop at city lines. It stretched across borders. And if I followed the trail, it would take me straight into the lion's den. The files revealed Rourke's true partner, a shadow financier known only as the Broker. And the only way to bring him down was to walk directly into his world. The airport felt like a confession booth with fluorescent lighting. No one knew what I'd done, who I'd accused, or how many people wanted me off the map. But every beep of a scanner sounded like a verdict. Lila didn't squeeze my hand. She flattened her palm against mine, a quiet oath that we'd passed through this together. We didn't tell Alvarez we were leaving. If Internal Affairs had put teeth into his phone, I wouldn't risk tracing our steps across a map. Instead, I left him a message that said only, "Following the money. If I stop replying, assume I found it." Following the money took us to an island where everything is older than guilt. Valletta. It was Lila's idea to start with corporate registries. My rebuilt system had flagged a trail of payments funneling through Kestrel Maritime Holdings, a nothing burger company with 1 employee and 4 P.O. boxes. The payments crossed oceans and came back as cultural grants, heritage restorations, and consulting fees. Bribes were being washed in history's colors. Our contact met us on the bastions at dusk, a registrar clerk who introduced herself as Mirabella and looked like she could hide a city beneath her coat. "I can't give you ownership documents," she said, eyes on the harbor. "But I can show you what you should already know." She slid a photocopy between us. A beneficiary list, names swallowed by black bars except one oversight, a signature half-cropped but legible. Shaw. Lila said the name aloud, tasting it. It meant nothing to her, it meant everything to the trail. My system spat out cross-references faster than I could read them. Shaw appeared on 3 boards, a maritime insurance syndicate, a resilience think tank, and a family office in Zurich that specialized in irony's love symmetry, compliance architecture. "Rourke doesn't own this," I said. "He leases it. Somebody else holds the deed, to the shell companies, to the judges, to him." Mira blew smoke toward the water. "In Malta, ships have many flags. Men do too. Careful how close you sail." We didn't get to say thank you. Mira turned, saw something over my shoulder, and ghosted into the dusk. 2 men stepped from a staircase cut into limestone, not running, not rushing, just moving with the confidence of permission. Lila didn't look, she grabbed my sleeve and we walked. Faster. A festival clogged the street, lanterns, brass, paper saints, blessing us with 1,000 faces. The men stayed at the edges like shadows that had learned to stand upright. We ducked into a chapel out a side door, through an arcade where a tourist asked Lila to take a picture. She lifted the camera, smiled, handed it back and in the same motion, passed me the photocopy to fold into my jacket lining. We came out on a ledge over the harbor, wind snapping at our coats. The men were gone. Or they were everywhere. Malta's stones hold their secrets. We left before dawn. Zurich kept its money behind manners. The family office's name, Arcturus Capital, could have been a star, a ship, a myth, or a threat. Inside, a compliance officer with careful hair met us in a room with windows so clean they were invisible. He introduced himself as Hans Brenner and served tea like absolution. "I should tell you to leave," he said, pouring. "I should tell you this meeting is inappropriate and must not continue." "But?" Lila asked. He pushed a manila folder across the table. "But watching the city pretend that numbers are neutral has become a moral hazard I can no longer price." Within the folder, sanitized statements, client codes, transaction hashes. The same pattern my system had flagged in Malta appeared here under a different light. Octave Advisors SPC, an umbrella fund that moved like water around rock. Outflow to cultural endowments. Inflow from consultancies tied to Rourke's contractors. A loop that cleaned itself. "Who signs?" I asked. Brenner didn't blink. "A trustee. E. Shaw." I felt a click inside the puzzle, plates shifting under a city. "Who is Shaw?" Lila pressed. "Arcturus does not ask who when a client is a trust," Brenner said. "We ask which jurisdictions." But if one were to be a romantic about the truth, he tapped the window where Zurich's tidy skyline reflected in itself. One would say, whoever can stand everywhere and be named nowhere. We left with copies that were not copies, files that were not files, and a man who had decided to risk his career for the sake of his conscience. I sent encrypted digests to my off-site vault, to 3 dead-drop servers, to a friend of a friend who only existed on a ham radio. My system drew an anatomically perfect diagram. Rourke was a ventricle. Shaw was the aorta. As we crossed the limmat, my phone buzzed. Not a call, a news alert. Detective Miguel Alvarez placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The article said protocol violations. It meant retaliation. The men in suits were finally inside the room where our one honest ally worked. The space around us shrank another inch. "We're against a clock," Lila said, voice flint. "We were always against a clock," I said. "We just thought we could hear it." Sleep became a rumor. We worked inside hotel rooms that changed every night, in cafes where a piano's left hand hid the click of my keys. Lila cross-checked philanthropy boards with court assignments. My system color-coded the overlaps. Judges whose children received scholarships from foundations that received anonymous endowments from Octave Advisors. Developers who donated to historic preservation societies on properties they were mid-demolition. An orchestra conductor whose gala always sold one painting to a bidder behind frosted glass. "That's the funnel," Lila murmured. "Art. Not NFTs, not crypto. Old-school laundering, provenance and velvet ropes." "Who curates the gala?" I asked. She froze, then dug through her inbox like someone excavating a room they'd once lived in. She found the email quickly because pain always knows where it left its screws. A decade-old note, the kind you keep because gratitude is a form of debt. "We're delighted to inform you, Ms. Hale, that your scholarship has been renewed through the Shaw Foundation's Journalism Fellows Program. Keep making us proud. E.S." Her maiden name sat there like a ghost, Hale. The signature at the bottom, E.S. A foundation that sponsored investigative journalism and restored cathedrals and insured ships. And, apparently, paid judges who forgot what oaths felt like. Lila's throat worked. "I never met her. It was all letters. She paid for my final year." Silence rearranged itself between us, not hostile, not ashamed, just a new geography. "This isn't on you," I said quietly. "Gifts are only poison if you drink them twice." She closed her eyes, then opened them as a reporter again. "We need to see her. People like E. Shaw don't give interviews. Then we don't ask." The gala in Geneva was called the Lumen, because hypocrisy prefers names that sound like light. The invitation list read like an index of power. Ministers, owners, anchors, a movie star who had cried once on camera and become a charity unto herself. We didn't have tickets, but we hadn't come to drink. The art went for crises and the crises went for applause. I watched a painting sell for a number that could have rebuilt an entire neighborhood and felt my teeth grind. And then the room shifted the way rooms do when a center of gravity walks in. She wasn't tall. She didn't have to be. The air made room for her shoulders, for the confidence that comes from building institutions that never learn your fingerprints. Silver hair, not a vanity shade but an earned one. A face cameras loved because it reflected what they wanted it to. She took the stage with a smile that had practiced compassion and discovered it became indistinguishable from performance. Our cities, she said into the microphone, are delicate organisms. They require stewardship, yes, but also courage. Tonight we celebrate those who build bridges between capital and conscience. Lila's hand found my sleeve. She didn't squeeze. She anchored. The placard beside the podium read, Eleanor Shaw, Chair, Shaw Foundation, Director, Ridge Media Group, Trustee, Arcturus Capital. Ridge Media Group. The parent company of the newspaper that had printed the first smear about me. The umbrella that paid Lila's editor. The board that funded independent watchdogs. The foundation that minted journalists like coins and spent them like silence. Eleanor Shaw looked out over the room, untroubled by the weight of the city on her tongue, and continued, Transparency must be built, not begged. Cameras clicked. Champagne sighed. A painting sold itself. We didn't approach her. Not then. I logged her entourage, a young chief of staff with a talent for disappearing, an aide whose eyes moved like they were translating, 2 security men who had learned to dress like scenery. Lila memorized exits. I traced vendor Wi-Fi footprints. People think power is a face. It's not. It's the quiet choreography around the face. When we finally slipped into the corridor, an usher stepped into our path with a smile that said no. Staff only. We are staff, Lila replied, showing a badge we hadn't printed because badges aren't always plastic. Sometimes they're posture. The usher's smile didn't move. The corridor emptied on a balcony that overlooked the old lake like an apology. The door at the far end opened. The chief of staff appeared, spoke into a mic, listened, nodded, left. The room beyond was small, upholstered, expensive. The wall held no art. The art was the people allowed inside. We waited until the minutes felt like thieves. Then I pushed the door. Eleanor Shaw was alone watching the lake. She didn't startle when she saw us, which told me 3 things. She'd been warned, she'd decided what voice to use, and we were already within the theater she'd staged. Mr. Gray, she said as if greeting a neighbor. Miss Hale. My heart moved in a way I didn't appreciate. You know our names. Her smile flickered. I know my investments. Lila stepped forward. You fund the paper that called him a criminal. I fund the paper that keeps this city sober, Shaw replied. Sometimes sobriety requires unpleasant flavors. And the judges? The permits? The money that washes and comes back wholly. She tilted her head, a masterclass in patient disappointment. You've been given an outline and colored it in with resentment. You think Rourke answers to me. That's charmingly linear. Then who do you answer to? I asked. Her eyes warmed in a way that made the room colder. To results. I slid a printout onto the table, a corner of that signature from Valletta, the hashes from Zurich, the scholarship letter from a decade ago. You've built a network that buys law, packages it as philanthropy, and sells it back to the public as resilience. Or, she said softly, I have propped up a city that would collapse without scaffolding. Institutions are brittle. People are fungible. I choose outcomes that keep bridges from burning. And kill journalists when they don't appreciate the view? My voice knifed. She met my anger without blinking. I do not blow up cars, Mr. Gray. Reckless men do reckless things when they are cornered. I build corridors so no one has to run. You built a maze, Lila said. And you put a minotaur at the center. For the first time, something like admiration touched Shaw's mouth. I offered you a corridor once, Ms. Hale. You used it to walk toward fire. Part of me is proud. The other part is curious how long before you regret your talent. She stood, smoothing a sleeve that did not need smoothing. You've come a long way for a very small conversation. On the way out, please tell security my office will issue you 2 visitor badges for Monday at 10. We'll speak properly then. The door opened behind us without a hand touching it. Her staff had perfected gravity. We stepped into the corridor. The usher's smile had become a wall. On the lake, the city gave back the stars it borrowed. Inside my chest, a metronome I hadn't noticed started ticking down. We were finally in the same room as the person who gave Rourke his leash. She had invited us to step deeper. We would have to because backing out now wasn't survival, it was surrender. As we reached the stairs, Lila's phone buzzed. One encrypted ping from a number we'd buried under 10 layers of precaution. Alvarez. Don't go to the meeting. They know the drive has a second partition. Someone on the inside gave up the map. If you walk into her office, you won't walk out. The message deleted itself as we read it. Lila looked up at me, eyes steady, fear behind the glass but not in front of it. What do we do? She asked. I looked back at the ballroom where the city was auctioning its conscience to applause, then at the lake where the reflections never had to pay taxes. We don't go to her office, I said. We make her come to ours. How? I opened my phone, scrolled to the one number I never thought I'd use and hit call. If this worked, it would drag the entire masquerade into daylight. If it failed, we'd be ghosts by morning. The line clicked. A familiar voice answered. And when I heard it, my stomach dropped through the floor. Because the broker wasn't just funding Lila's scholarships and the paper that smeared me. The broker owned the studio that would broadcast the truth, or bury it for good. Editor-in-Chief Morrison, the voice drawled. You've been very quiet, Ms. Hale. Ready to come home? The man who shaped Lila's career, and greenlit the smear against me, just agreed to a meeting he thinks he controls. He doesn't know we'll bring Eleanor Shaw's ledger to his own newsroom. He doesn't know the feed we're planning will lock on air and can't be cut without killing the station. And he absolutely doesn't know which person in his control room is already working for us. Newsrooms smell like nerves and old coffee. I hadn't walked into one in years, and I didn't expect my return to feel like marching into an ambush. The glass doors slid open and swallowed us whole, fluorescent lights buzzing like anxious flies. Morrison was waiting. Lila's former editor. Thick glasses, thin patience. A man who had spent decades pretending neutrality was integrity. He rose from his desk as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't published the article that painted me a criminal. Lila, he said warmly, too warmly. You look thinner. Stress isn't good for you. Her jaw set. Neither is betrayal. He chuckled, gesturing us into a conference room. Cameras dotted the corners. His assistants hovered at the edges, their tablets glowing with notes none of them would admit were instructions. I slid a plain flash drive across the table. Before you gloat, watch this. He hesitated, then plugged it in. On the wall screen bloomed a ledger so detailed it looked alive. Every payment Rourke moved, every judge bought, every endowment washed clean through Shaw's foundations. The names scrolled like gravestones. Morrison's smile faltered. Do you know what you're asking me to do? Broadcast this and I sign the station's death warrant. Shaw's board owns Ridge Media. Half the advertisers are tied to her charities. You've already signed worse, Lila said coldly. You killed Jonah Pike by silence. His blood is on every page you print. This is your chance to balance one ledger with another. Morrison's hand trembled on the mouse. He glanced at the assistants. Even if I air it, they'll cut the feed. Shaw controls every switch. I leaned forward. Not tonight. Because one of your own already flipped the switches for us. At that, one of the assistants, a young technician with nervous eyes, stepped forward. I didn't know his name. Didn't need to. He pulled a small device from his pocket and snapped it into the console. Lights shifted on the board like a lock clicking open. The feed will loop, he explained quickly. Once it goes live, nothing short of physically pulling the cables will stop it. And I've disabled the breakers. You've got 10 minutes of unstoppable truth. 10 minutes. That was all. When the clock hit 9, the city's televisions and live streams lit up. Not with talking heads, not with scripted spin, but with my voice. Citizens, I began, standing before the camera in a room that smelled of fear. They told you I was a fraud. That I destroyed cases. That I vanished in shame. Tonight I show you the truth, evidence they tried to bury, the names they tried to erase. Behind me, graphs unfurled, footage played, documents scrolled. The microfilm, the offshore accounts, Shaw's signatures, all laid bare. Lila stood off to the side, her eyes locked on mine, her expression both anchor and storm. The chat feed surged. Journalists called in from rival stations demanding comment. Protesters erupted onto courthouse steps. Alvarez, suspended but not broken, texted one word from a burner phone. Alive. For 7 minutes, the city saw everything. And then the doors of the newsroom burst open. Security stormed in, led not by Morrison but by Shaw's own men. Black suits, cold eyes, guns half hidden under jackets. The technician paled but held the console. 3 minutes left, he shouted. One of the men raised his weapon. Morrison shouted something but it was drowned in the chaos. Alvarez arrived like thunder. I don't know how he got past the lobby, maybe with an old badge or maybe with sheer defiance, but he appeared with his revolver drawn, covering us. Keep rolling, he barked. The feed didn't cut. It couldn't. 2 minutes. The men closed in. Alvarez fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Glass rained down. The room shook with panic. Shaw herself didn't come. She didn't have to. Her voice echoed through Morrison's phone on speaker, calm, composed. End this, Nicholas. Walk away now and live. Or finish your little show and be buried with it. I stepped toward the camera, heart hammering. You hear that? That's the voice of Eleanor Shaw, the woman who calls corruption stewardship, who launders bribes as philanthropy. She's threatening me now live. You don't have to take my word anymore, you can take hers. Lila grabbed the phone, held it up to the microphone. Shaw's silence was the loudest confession of all. 1 minute. The suits hesitated. Their orders were unraveling live on air. Morrison, pale and sweating, whispered, "My God, we can't take this back." "No," Lila said. "We're not supposed to." 30 seconds. The technician pulled the master lever. The broadcast ended not with static, but with a hard freeze on Shaw's name, her ledger glowing behind it. A digital monument to everything she tried to hide. Silence followed. In the room. In the city. In the empire she built. The suits lowered their weapons. Alvarez exhaled smoke and fury. Morrison collapsed into a chair, muttering prayers to gods he didn't believe in. We had done it. We had carved the truth into stone. But victories in this world are never clean. Because as the camera shut down and the technician scrambled, my phone buzzed. A single text. From an unknown number. Nice move. But Shaw was never the top. Call me when you're ready for the real list. B.